At a small Chicago clinic, an Alaska nurse called about my daughter and said, "Your son-in-law hasn't been here." I booked the first flight north without crying, and by dawn, his Bahamas honeymoon was no longer the worst thing I'd found. The phone showed an Alaska area code, and I almost let it ring. I was standing in the supply closet of the community health clinic where I volunteered twice a week, trying to wedge a new box of sterile bandages onto a shelf that had been overfull since August. It was the kind of quiet, useful task retirement leaves you with after 40 years in emergency rooms. Not important in any grand sense, but ordered, measured. The sort of work that gives your hands something to do when your life has finally grown still. I answered on the third buzz. "Is this Helen Carter?" The voice was female, young, and careful in the specific way nurses are careful when they are about to deliver something the body of the person on the other end will feel before the words finish landing. "Yes," I said. "Mrs. Carter, my name is Patricia. I'm a nurse at Providence Hospice Center in Anchorage. I'm calling about your daughter, Emily." The bandage box slipped from my hands. White paper sleeves burst across the linoleum floor, but I barely heard them hit. "What about Emily?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. 40 years in the ER teaches the body to sound calm before it is calm. Get the facts first. Collapse later. Patricia hesitated for one beat too long. "Mrs. Carter, I'm so sorry to be the one telling you this. Emily was admitted to our facility 3 weeks ago. Her condition has deteriorated significantly in the last 48 hours. I found your number in her phone under Mom, emergency. She asked me to call you as soon as she was lucid enough to say so. I really think you should come. 3 weeks. Not hospice, not deteriorated, not even come quickly, though that one mattered too. 3 weeks. My daughter had been dying in Alaska for 21 days, and the first I was hearing about it was from a stranger on a Tuesday afternoon in a supply closet in Chicago. Where is Derek? I asked. Her husband. Why didn't he call me? Another pause. This one told me Patricia knew more than she wanted to say, and that what she knew was not the kind of thing she said over the phone to strangers. "Mr. Lawson hasn't been here," she said quietly. "Not once since Emily was admitted. He listed himself as traveling for business. Mrs. Carter, I don't think she's had anyone with her." I closed my eyes. 1 second. For 1 second, the supply closet smelled like antiseptic and old paper, and the specific panic I recognized from the night Tom died. The same icy hollowness, the same absolute certainty that life had split cleanly in two, and there was no crossing back to the person I had been 10 seconds earlier. "Tell Emily I'm coming," I said. I hung up before Patricia could answer, before she could say something kind that would have broken me open right there on the linoleum. Before I explain what I found in Anchorage, you need to understand something about Emily and something about Derek, and then something about me. Emily was 35 years old, a 5th grade teacher in Juneau, who believed with her whole chest that children deserve to feel safe inside a classroom. She made soup for sick neighbors. She cried at nature documentaries. She still called me every 3 days no matter what, and she sent midnight heart emojis when insomnia found her, a habit that started in her 20s and that I had come to depend on the way you depend on small, reliable lights. She was not a woman who disappeared without warning. She was not dramatic. She was not the kind of person who needed space from her mother. She was the kind of person who texted me when she was going to be 15 minutes late to dinner so I wouldn't worry. 7 days without contact, 7 days without a text, a read receipt, a photo of her classroom or the sea outside her window or whatever Juneau restaurant she was trying. I told myself it was fine on day 2, on day 4, on day 6. I told myself she was busy, that teachers got consumed in November, that I was being the particular kind of anxious that retirement had made worse. On day 7, the voice inside me that had spent 40 years diagnosing things before the chart caught up, said, "Get in the car." I had met Derek Lawson at Emily's friend's wedding 6 years earlier. He was handsome in the way that men who know they're handsome carry it, as a tool, something deployed deliberately. He wore charm the way certain people wore expensive cologne, with full awareness of its effect and a willingness to apply it generously in professional company. I did not like him on instinct. I told myself this was unfair. I smiled at the rehearsal dinner, danced at the wedding, sent anniversary cards, invited him into my home at every holiday, and spent 5 years convincing myself the tightness between my shoulder blades whenever he entered a room was just maternal possessiveness dressed up as intuition. But I noticed things. The way he called Emily sensitive when she disagreed and dramatic when she cried, the 2 words men use to make a woman's feelings sound like a character flaw rather than information worth hearing. The way she had grown quieter year by year after marrying him, not smaller, exactly. She still sent me photos of class pets and art projects and wrote long emails about children whose reading had clicked open overnight like a lock finally finding the right key. But she had started checking herself before she spoke, as if every sentence needed approval before leaving her mouth. At Christmas 2 years ago, she had been pale, thinner than I'd seen her since her 20s. She complained of headaches and fatigue. I told her she should see a doctor. She smiled and said, "You always think everything is medical." Maybe that was true, but I had spent my adult life learning how illness announces itself in color changes, and the reaching for chairs you normally wouldn't need, and sentences that stop just before they land. I should have pushed harder. I knew it when Patricia called. I knew it on every flight that followed. I packed in 14 minutes. 2 sweaters, underwear, phone charger, blood pressure medication, a folder of documents from Reflex More Than Reason, and, without fully understanding why I grabbed it, the pink construction sandpaper photo album Emily had made me when she was 12. Glitter flowers on the cover, crooked handwriting. My mom makes the best chocolate chip cookies. My mom reads me stories. My mom is the strongest person I know. I grabbed it because I needed to carry some version of her that had not yet been hurt. I bought the first ticket north and paid too much and did not care. Chicago to Seattle, Seattle to Anchorage. My movements had the crisp, mechanical quality of someone whose hands are doing all the necessary things while the mind lags several feet behind, still standing on linoleum surrounded by bandage wrappers, still holding a phone that had just changed everything. On the first flight, the woman beside me asked cheerfully as we taxied down the runway, "Headed somewhere fun?" I looked at her bright scarf and her paperback and her entirely reasonable expectation that I would answer with a destination and a smile. "No," I said. Then I put in my earbuds without turning anything on. Providence Hospice Center sat on the edge of Anchorage in a low building with warm lights in the windows. It looked peaceful, gentle, the way places look when they are specifically designed to soften the fact of what happens inside them. Places where people go to die should not be allowed to look gentle. Patricia was at the front desk when I arrived. She stood when I said my name. She led me down a corridor that smelled of lavender and antiseptic, and the particular floral overlay of institutions trying to make inevitability feel bearable. I knew that smell. I had worked inside it for 4 decades. When she opened the door to room 107, I forgot to breathe. For one terrible second, I did not recognize the woman in the bed. Emily had always been beautiful in that unpolished, earned way. Warm-faced, dark-haired like Tom, with my green eyes and a smile that made children trust her before she said a word. The woman in the bed looked like Emily after the world had taken an eraser to her and worked at it for months. Hollow cheeks, waxy skin, collarbones pressing sharp against the hospital gown, a line in her left arm, oxygen at her nose, a monitor beside her reading numbers I could interpret from the doorway. Heart rate too high, oxygen too low, blood pressure fragile and getting worse. I dropped my bag and crossed the room before I knew I was moving. Emily, a whisper, all I had. I took her hand. It was cold, impossibly light, as if bone and skin were what remained. "Baby, I'm here. I'm here now." Her eyelids fluttered. Then slowly, painfully, as if surfacing through water, her eyes found my face. "Mom," she whispered. That was all she said. Those 3 letters. They broke every professional piece of me that had held itself together since the supply closet floor. I bent over her bed and pressed her hand against my cheek. "Of course I came," I said, though my voice dissolved halfway through. "Why didn't you call me? Why didn't anyone?" Derek said not to. Her voice was barely there. "He said you were busy. Said you'd worry. Said I'd be home soon anyway." Busy. He had told my dying daughter I was too busy to come. Patricia touched my arm gently. "Mrs. Carter, can we step into the hall?" I kissed Emily's forehead. Then I followed Patricia into the corridor and stood with my back straight and my hands folded the way I used to stand outside trauma bays when I needed the information before I could afford to feel it. "How long?" I asked. "Days," Patricia said. "Maybe a week, maybe less. Metastatic pancreatic cancer. It spread to the liver first, then the lungs. We can keep her comfortable. We cannot reverse this." I put one hand flat against the wall. "When was she diagnosed?" 4 months ago. 4 months. 4 months of scans and oncology appointments and treatment decisions and pain, and not one phone call reached me. "Where is Derek?" I asked, because I needed to hear the answer even though part of me already knew it was going to land like a physical thing. Patricia he the day she was at he stayed 20, listed himself as primary care, told administration had urgent business, not since. "Where is he traveling?" She reached into her scrub pocket. The screen showed an Insta Derek on white turquoise water, swim trunks and sunglasses, his arm around a blonde woman in a bikini who leaned into him like she belonged there and had never belonged anywhere else. The caption read, "Paradise found with my paradise. Bahamas, I'm living my best life. New beginnings posted yesterday." The woman was tagged, Vanessa Klein. I stared at the image until my vision blurred at the edges. "Who is she?" I asked. "She works at his firm in Anchorage. I found the account trying to reach him for medical updates." Patricia paused. "Mrs. Carter, I believe they're on their honeymoon." I turned away from the phone, because for one dangerous second I wanted to put it through the wall. Honeymoon. As if the word itself had become something malformed. "That's impossible," I said. "They divorced last month," Patricia said quietly. "Expedited filing. Derek alleged abandonment and incompatibility due to chronic illness. Emily signed the papers from the oncology ward. He remarried 2 weeks later in Nassau." I braced both hands against the wall. He had divorced her while she was dying, not after a long dissolution, not after grief had worn them apart gradually. While she was sick enough to sign her name from a hospital bed, he had filed for divorce, awarded himself the house and accounts, remarried a woman from his office, and flown to the Caribbean, and left my daughter in hospice with no family contact, no coverage, no money, and no one at her bedside. Why wasn't I listed, I asked, in her chart, in the intake forms, anywhere? He completed her admission paperwork. He listed himself as primary contact and his assistant as secondary. Our policy prohibits contacting unlisted family without patient authorization. 3 days ago, Emily had a lucid interval. She found your number herself and told me to call if she became too weak to do it. She had thought of me. Even then, even after months of isolation, of being told I was busy, of being managed out of her own dying, she had still reached for me. A coldness settled through me then. Not anger. Anger is hot and imprecise. This was something else. Surgical. Contained. The feeling I used to get in the ER bizarre when a diagnosis snapped into clarity, and there was suddenly no uncertainty, only a clear sequence of necessary actions. I need copies of everything, I said. Admission forms, medication charts, billing statements, treatment records from every provider since her diagnosis. All of it. Patricia nodded immediately. There's one more thing. Of course there was. Derek hasn't paid a cent toward her care. The outstanding balance is just over $42,000. He told administration her teaching insurance would cover it. It didn't. Her insurance ended when she went on medical leave 3 months ago. He knew that. He had to know. He had handled her paperwork, controlled every form since her admission. He had left her here to die uninsured and invisible while he structured his exit. Can I use a computer? I asked. Now, tonight. Patricia did not ask why. She led me to a staff office and logged me into an empty terminal. I started with Emily's bank account. Years earlier, when she first moved to Alaska, she had listed me as emergency co-access, the same practical caution I had listed her on my own account, the kind of quiet paperwork that exists between mothers and daughters who understand that emergencies don't announce themselves. I had never used it. Parents do not go looking through their adult children's finances until everything has already gone wrong. The checking account held $83.14. The savings account, which had contained just under $30,000 the last time she mentioned it casually on a call, was empty. I went line by line through the transaction history. Electronic transfers, repeated, precise, monthly, then weekly, accelerating over 3 months. Same destination account each time. Derek Lawson. I pulled the divorce filing next. Alaska Public Records. He had alleged abandonment. Claimed Emily had become erratic and verbally abusive after her diagnosis. Claimed she refused treatment and refused marital cooperation. He had painted my daughter, a woman who kept emergency granola bars in her classroom cabinet for children who came to school pretending they weren't hungry, as unstable. He had awarded himself the house, the car, and most of the liquid assets through an expedited process that no one contested, because the only person positioned to contest it was medicated, exhausted, and entirely alone. Then I found the life insurance policy. $500,000. Still active. Premiums auto-drafted monthly, pulling from Emily's remaining accounts until they ran dry. Beneficiary. Derek Lawson. I stared at the screen for a long time. He had not simply abandoned her. He had structured the abandonment. He had moved her money, severed her support network, rushed a divorce, remarried, departed the country, and left himself waiting at the finish line of her death with a claim already in place. I called Marcus Reed. We had worked together years ago in Chicago. He had been a trauma surgeon then, the kind of doctor whose hands stayed steady during things that made lesser people leave the room. He had gone to law school later because, as he put it, he got tired of stitching people together only to watch systems tear them apart again. He practiced medical malpractice and estate law and was brilliant at the specific intersection of bodies and betrayal. He answered on the second ring. It was past midnight in Chicago. Helen, what's wrong? Everything, I said. Then I told him all of it. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he said, does she have a will? I don't know. Find out. If she doesn't, draft one tonight. I'll send you a template. Get witnesses, get a notary, and file the insurance fraud concern before he files a claim. Freeze the process wherever you can. Document every transfer from her accounts. Document every failure to provide medical contact. Helen, we are not just protecting money. We are building a record of intent. That was why I had called Marcus. He never merely reacted. He mapped. By 2:30 in the morning, he had emailed me a template and a checklist that read like battle orders. Patricia returned with the printed records while I was still working. We spread them across the desk in a borrowed staff office, and I went through every page. The chart notes painted something far worse than I'd expected. Emily's symptoms had appeared nearly a year before her admission. Weight loss, persistent back pain, nausea, appetite changes. The clinical notes from her initial oncology consultation included a sentence I had to read 3 times before it finished registering. Patient appears emotionally dependent on spouse's approval regarding treatment decisions. Husband questions financial value of aggressive intervention. He had talked her out of fighting, not by forbidding, by reframing, by making treatment sound like vanity, like a refusal to accept reality, like dragging healthy people through something avoidable when the outcome was uncertain anyway. He had taught her that wanting to live was selfish, and she had believed him because she loved him. And love, when managed by the wrong person, becomes the instrument of your own diminishment. I sat with that knowledge for exactly as long as I could afford. Then I went back to Emily's room. She was awake, lucid enough to track my face when I sat beside her. Mom, she said. I'm sorry. No, I said immediately. None of that. She cried then, the quiet, exhausted cry of someone who has been trying not to be a burden for so long that the effort has become its own kind of injury. I should have called you months ago, she whispered. Why didn't you? She stared at the blanket. Outside the window, Anchorage was completely dark because he kept saying I was making everything harder. That needing people was selfish, that if I loved everyone properly, I would protect them from my illness instead of spreading it through them like. She stopped. He made me feel like asking for help was a form of cruelty. I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was. Not loud cruelty, not anything a stranger could easily point to. The quiet, specific cruelty of teaching a woman to believe that love means shrinking, that need is shameful, that the most generous thing she could offer the people who loved her was her own silence. When I opened my eyes, I said, Emily, listen to me. He lied. About all of it. About what love costs. About what you owed him. About me. She nodded. Tears slid into her hair. I know that now. Then, I just know it too late. Not too late for everything. I leaned forward. I need your help. help. We are going to change what he thinks he gets from this. I showed her the will template Marcus had sent. I told her about the life insurance policy and what it would become if Derek's name stayed on it. Then I told her the idea that had arrived somewhere between the bank records and the chart notes while I was reading about every child she had studied and every classroom she had made feel safe, a foundation for teachers facing serious illness, emergency grants for treatment travel, rent support during unpaid medical leave, classroom continuity funds for teachers who couldn't afford to stop showing up even while their bodies were telling them to. Emily's face changed when she heard it. Not physically. The illness had moved too far for that, but something in her eyes lit in the specific way that people's eyes light when they are handed back something that was taken from them. Could we include books? She asked. Books? For classroom libraries, for teachers who buy them with their own money, for children who don't have much at home. I laughed through tears. Yes, absolutely books. Patricia brought 2 nurses as witnesses. A notary Patricia located from a local service arrived before noon. Emily signed slowly, each signature of visible labor, her hand trembling but moving. When it was done, she let her head fall back and said, very quietly, I feel like I can breathe now. That afternoon, Derek called on Emily's phone. I answered before she could reach for it. Hello, Derek? Silence. Then, careful and calibrating, Helen, what are you doing there? Sitting beside my daughter while she dies. How are the Bahamas? His breath changed on the line. A pause. Small, controlled, but enough to tell me he had heard the steel in my voice and was deciding how to respond to it. I don't think this is productive. Emily and I have a private arrangement that— You mean the part where you divorced a terminal woman from her hospital bed, drained her accounts, left her uninsured in hospice, and flew to Nassau with your mistress? Yes. Let's discuss how private that should remain. You don't understand the full situation. I understand you filed for divorce while she was vomiting between treatments. I understand you transferred her savings in increments designed not to trigger bank alerts. I understand you are the named beneficiary on a $500,000 life insurance policy that is currently under formal fraud review. The line went quiet. You don't know what you're interfering with, he said finally. His voice had hardened into something that was not quite a threat and was not quite anything else. I know exactly what I'm interfering with, I said. A dying woman's right not to be turned into a receipt. I hung up. For the next 18 hours, I worked like I had during long ER seasons, when the city seemed determined to bleed all at once. Insurance fraud notice, filed with the insurer's Special Investigations Unit. Bank transfer documentation compiled and sent to Marcus. Divorce filing flagged to Marcus's colleague, attorney Dr. Renata Park, 12 years in estate litigation, former clinical ethicist, the specific person you wanted when the case sat exactly at the intersection of medicine, marriage, and financial exploitation. Patricia gave a formal written statement about the admission circumstances. Emily signed a document revoking Derek's hospital communication rights except through counsel. Then Derek came back, not with humility, with a local attorney and the expression of a man who believed that if he could just get into the room fast enough, he could still manage the story. Patricia found me first. I found him in the family consultation room, vacation tan still visible, dressed in the careful way men dress when they want fabric to do the work of dignity for them. He stood when I entered. Helen, thank God. This has all gotten completely out of— You have 10 seconds, I said, to tell me why you're in this building. His attorney stepped forward to introduce himself. I ignored him. Derek said he had standing regarding Emily's affairs as her former spouse. I said standing and interest were different things. He said he needed to speak with her privately. I said absolutely not. He lowered his voice and started talking about insurance, about property, about trust obligations. Not how is she? Not may I see her? Not is she in pain? Insurance, property, trust. I said very softly, say one more financial term before you say her name, and this conversation ends with security. Emily appeared in the doorway behind me. Against my instructions, against every reasonable argument, she had gotten up. Patricia was behind her with a chair, but Emily stayed standing, one hand braced against the doorframe, looking at the man she had married and changed herself for, and protected, and finally stopped being able to protect herself from. Derek's face softened on command. His shoulders sloped. The coat of concern slipped on. Emily, thank God. I've been worried. Don't. Her voice was barely there, but it was steady. Don't do that in front of me anymore. He tried to step toward her. I moved into the space between them. I signed those papers, Emily said from behind me, because I thought if I loved you the right way, you'd at least stop being cruel. All I did was teach you how little you had to give. I'm done teaching you that. Patricia, standing 3 feet to my left, quietly lifted her phone and began recording. So did I. Derek's attorney attempted to intervene. Derek said, low and finally without any charm at all, "This is a mistake," Emily answered from behind me. "No, marrying you was." Security removed him 12 minutes later after he refused administration's request to leave. Emily collapsed into the chair as soon as he was gone. I knelt in front of her. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "Yes," she whispered. "He needed to hear me choose myself at least once." That night, she slept peacefully for the first time since I had arrived. The next morning, she asked for the pink album. I showed her every page. She smiled at the glitter flowers. "I thought that was genuinely elegant," she said. "It was 1999. It was the height of refinement." She laughed. The real one. The one that came from somewhere below the careful face she had been wearing for months. The one that was crooked and a little too loud, and that I had not heard heard in 2 years, and I did not try to hold on to it because that is what ruins good moments. I just listened to it while it lasted. We spent that day with memory instead of fear. She told me about the student who had been afraid to read aloud until she started passing him word puzzles between classes so he could practice without an audience. About the reading corner she had rebuilt twice because she decided the first beanbags made children feel like they were sitting in an afterthought. About the way she used to stay late on Fridays rearranging bookshelves because, she said this seriously, without irony, if children have to be anywhere, it should at least feel kind. She told me about Derek too, not the betrayal. We had been through that, the beginning. How he had remembered she hated roses because they smelled too strong in warm rooms and brought wildflower arrangements in mason jars instead because she had once mentioned loving Ohio roadsides in June. How he had sat on tiny classroom chairs at parent reading nights and charmed everyone around her, which made it easier when things started changing to keep defending him to herself. He made me feel like compromise was adulthood, she said. Like every small discomfort was just being a grown-up. By the time I understood what was happening, I had already spent 3 years explaining him to myself. She told me about the oncologist who recommended aggressive treatment and a clinical trial in Seattle. How Derek had waited until they reached the car before dismantling it. Doctors profit from hope. The trial will ruin you physically and financially. Dignity matters more than extending suffering. He made it sound like fighting was selfish, she whispered. Like I was refusing reality and making everyone carry my refusal with me. How he had moved her to Anchorage under the pretense of better specialists, which removed her from the only community that knew and loved her without condition. How he had changed her phone plan, managed her mail, screened her calls, and relayed my messages with subtle edits that made me sound distracted, tired, occupied with my own life. Not desperate to reach her, not watching the phone and waiting, not leaving voicemails in the parking lot of the community clinic because the supply closet felt too small for how much I missed her. I tried to call you twice, she said. The first time he came in crying, he said if I told you too early, you'd drop everything and hate him, and then if this was the end, couldn't we at least have some peace? The second time I was too tired to fight. After that, not calling got easier every day. I did not blame her for that. I had spent too many years working with women who had been slowly trained into silence to mistake Emily's quietness for anything other than what it was, the specific adaptation of a person who has learned that speaking costs more than staying still. He brought the divorce in stages, she said, not as rejection, as mercy. He said if I loved him, I would free him, that if we divorced on paper, it would be easier for both of us, that the papers were just housekeeping. She signed them from her hospital bed, medicated, barely able to sit up, while he stood beside her telling her this was how love worked when it matured. She looked at the blanket for a long time. I helped him, she said. That's the worst part. Not that he lied, that he taught me to help him. I took her face in both hands. What he did was not your failure, I said. It was a slow, careful, deliberate betrayal executed by someone who understood exactly how decent people work. He used your love as a map to everything he needed to reach. She leaned her forehead against my hands. I just wanted one person to stay, she said. I stayed. I know. A breath. I'm sorry it took me so long to let you. 4 days after I arrived, Emily died. The light in the room had gone gold in the late afternoon. Patricia had adjusted her medication. A volunteer had left flowers Emily no longer had the strength to smell. Outside, snowmelt dripped steadily from the eaves. She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. I love you, Mom. Always, baby. Always. One more breath, then none. I did not leave Alaska. Not immediately. Grief rarely works in large, decisive motions. It works in drawers, in mugs left unwashed, in sweaters still hung over the back of chairs. It works in deciding which box to pack first and which one still cannot be touched without your hands refusing. For 2 months, I traveled between Chicago and Juneau, slowly and carefully dismantling the practical remains of the life Emily had built, while Derek tried to collect what he believed he was owed. Marcus filed the insurance contest the day of Emily's funeral. He built the case on coercion, financial exploitation, fraudulent inducement in the divorce, misrepresentation to medical staff, and beneficiary bad faith. The insurer froze the claim immediately and opened a formal investigation. Renata Park filed separate documentation with Alaska's Elder and Vulnerable Adult Financial Exploitation Unit. Emily had been, in the final months of her illness, legally a vulnerable adult. The transfers qualified for formal review. Then Vanessa sent a box. I had not expected to hear from her again after the funeral, where she had stood in the back row in black, looking far younger and more genuinely wrecked than the glossy Bahamas photograph had suggested. She had approached me afterward and pressed a note into my hand. If you need help bringing him down, call me. I have things. The box contained text message screenshots, booking emails, expense reports, and a voice memo Derek had left on her phone by mistake one evening in Nassau. In it, laughing over the sound of ocean, he said, "Once the policy clears, we won't have to worry about anything. I told you the timing would work." That recording became the hinge on which everything else turned, because there is a difference between suspecting a man planned his wife's death as a financial event and hearing him say so in his own voice above background wave sounds. The insurer denied his claim entirely, citing suspicious timing, deliberate abandonment, material misrepresentation, and beneficiary bad faith. Derek's firm opened an internal investigation when Vanessa provided documentation that he had billed portions of his Bahamas travel as client development. His access was restricted. His clients were redistributed. His colleagues stopped returning calls emails with the strained courtesy of institutions preparing to cut someone loose. He was fired within 90 days. His attorney filed a challenge to the insurance denial and threatened civil action against the trust, the hospice, and me personally. Marcus described this accurately as the behavior of a panicking man trying to create the impression of leverage he no longer had. We met them in mediation in a glass-walled conference room on the 20th floor of a downtown Anchorage building, with mountains visible behind Derek that had no interest in the ugliness happening at the table in front of them. He had lost weight. The Polish was still there, but brittle now. The specific brittleness of men who have built themselves entirely around being unchecked and are encountering a check for the first time. His attorney talked about grief and confusion and unfortunate decisions made under psychological strain. Marcus waited until the man ran out of polished language. Then he slid the file across the table and said, "Tab 3. Inside were the bank transfers, the divorce filing, the hospice intake forms, the oncologist notes documenting Derek's interference with treatment decisions, the voice memo, and the transcript of Derek's call with me the afternoon I told him the beneficiary had changed. If your client wants to test a jury on whether these facts constitute fraud, financial exploitation, and bad faith beneficiary conduct," Marcus said, "I would be genuinely delighted to help him." Derek's attorney kept reading. Then he looked at his client. Derek leaned forward. "I loved Emily." The room went still. I looked at him across the table. "No," I said. "You loved what staying beside her would have cost. You chose the cheaper option." He stared at the table. "She was already dying," he muttered. And there it was. Not remorse, entitlement. The idea that a dying woman had become unowned matter. Something past the point of protection, available for harvest. That the money was already effectively his because the body that had earned it was no longer going to last long enough to spend it. 30 minutes later, his attorney returned from a private caucus with a substantially revised proposal. No claim on the insurance. No challenge to the trust. In exchange, no separate civil filing tied to public emotional distress damages. I told Marcus what I wanted. A signed retraction, submitted anywhere the divorce allegations against Emily had been formally recorded, withdrawing every claim that she had been unstable, abusive, or abandoning, the foundation protected from interference, and Derek to understand, in language as clear as I could make it, that my silence going forward was not forgiveness. It was disinterest. Marcus got all of it. The retractions mattered more than the money. Lies once entered into legal records acquire a smell of permanence. I wanted Emily's name stripped clean. Derek's firm fired him 6 weeks after mediation. Vanessa filed for divorce before the season changed. She later told me, through a mutual acquaintance, that she had found evidence of other debts, other fabrications, the predictable archaeology of a man who had been excavating people for so long, he had forgotten there was supposed to be something on the other side of the tunnel. I moved to Juneau, not all at once. Grief moves in drawers and sweaters and the stubborn decision not to pack the mug she used every morning until the morning you finally can. But eventually I was there more than I was anywhere else. And eventually staying felt less like a decision and more like the obvious thing. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a view of the water. Every inch of it was Emily. Books stacked on the floor beside the couch because she kept meaning to buy more shelves. Lesson plan sticky notes on the sugar jar. A chipped blue mug that read "World's Okayest Teacher" because a student had found it funny, and she had too. I left most of it intact the first year. At the school I started small. Reading groups on Tuesdays, library sorting on Thursdays, then art table cleanup because apparently no one else in the building had experience with the particular chaos of 12 second graders and a communal glitter supply. Children accepted me the way children accept anything that arrives consistently and doesn't make the room feel wrong. I was Miss Lawson's mom at first, then Ms. Helen, then the lady who knew where the good picture books were hidden. A boy named Evan followed me around for 3 weeks before finally asking, in the solemn way small children ask things they have been thinking about for a long time, "Are you staying or are you temporary?" "I'm staying," I said. He nodded once, satisfied. Good. Temporary people make the room feel wobbly. I thought about that sentence for a long time after he walked away. Emily had been steady for those children. I could see it everywhere once I understood how to look. In the worn beanbags she had bought herself because the district ones were too flat. In the bookmarks she made from cardstock and yarn because she thought children deserved objects that felt like invitations. In the cabinet of emergency granola bars for the kids who came to school pretending they weren't hungry. She had not just taught reading, she had built refuge. The first foundation grant review convened in early spring. 3 teachers, a principal, a retired union representative, Marcus by video for legal guidance. We reviewed applications from across Alaska and the Midwest because word had spread through teacher networks faster than I had any right to expect. A woman in Yakima needed funds to travel for breast cancer treatment without losing her apartment and her boys. A man in Fairbanks was on unpaid leave after heart surgery and couldn't cover rent through the end of his recovery. A kindergarten teacher in rural Montana was trying to afford a temporary classroom aide while she underwent treatment for lymphoma because her district had no coverage for that situation, and she refused to leave her students without someone to hold the room steady. We funded all 3. When I signed the first checks, my hands shook harder than they had signing any legal document since Emily died, because this was the first time the circle had closed in a good direction. Derek had wanted Emily's illness to become his liquidity. Instead, it became shelter shelter, medicine, a hand extended to strangers who might otherwise have fallen through the gap between sick and recovered without anyone noticing. The insurer released the policy into the trust Emily created in her final days. Combined with her remaining assets, donations from colleagues, and a fundraiser that spread far beyond Juneau once other teachers shared it, the foundation launched with just under $600,000. Enough to matter, enough to reach people she would never meet, enough to make her name useful in the world long after the man who tried to erase it finished failing. One Friday in late autumn, I was sitting at the library checkout desk during a school family night, helping children stamp borrowed books, when a mother paused at the memorial plaque near the entrance. She read it. Then she turned to me. "My son had Miss Lawson the year his father left," she said. She noticed he was pretending not to care. She kept word puzzles in her desk for him. She'd send him to get one whenever he looked like he might cry in front of the class. She looked at the plaque. "I just wanted you to know that." She walked away before I could answer. I stood there with the stamp pad in my hand and felt something inside me settle. Not close, not heal, the way magazines use the word. Settle, as if the weight had found a better place to rest. At night in Juneau, I still take out the pink album. The glitter is falling off now. The glue has yellowed at the edges. One page has a crayon drawing of me in scrubs with red circle cheeks and a badge the size of a dinner plate. Another has the note in Emily's childish handwriting. "My mom can fix anything except when the VCR eats the tape. Then she says bad words. I laugh every time. Then I cry." Both feel correct. Derek lost his job, his second wife, his professional network, and eventually his apartment. Bankruptcy followed. The last I heard, he had moved back to his parents' house in Seattle. People who had once admired the idea of him stopped returning calls. He blamed me for everything, apparently, which is the thing men like Derek do when accountability arrives. They confuse it with persecution. I did not take pleasure in it, but I did not look away from it either. I could not save Emily from the cancer. I could not reach her in time to change what Derek had done, but I was there at the end. She did not die alone. He did not get paid for her death. And the life he had treated as an inconvenient asset, on his way to something better, became a light in classrooms, hospitals, and homes he will never set foot in. Maybe that is not justice in the theatrical sense. No thunderbolt, no singular cinematic ruin, just consequence, moving steadily through every institution and relationship he had tried to use as furniture. The kind of consequence that lasts longer than vengeance ever could. I keep a packed bag in the hall closet now. 2 sweaters, underwear, charger, medication, and the pink album. Always the pink album. Because when the paperwork is done and the wrong people have been diminished into exactly what they deserve, what remains is not the betrayal. What remains is the child who made glitter flowers for her mother and grew into a teacher who made frightened children feel brave enough to try one sentence at a time. He said she was already dying, as if that were a reason. As if dying people owe the living their silence. Emily mattered while she was dying. She mattered after. She matters still.